introduce Bridget Striker. I've known Bridget a very long time. She and I work at the library here in this building, and it's been 10 years since we've worked together here. She started in 2001, and in 2005 she became the local history coordinator. And Bridget, in her background, received a Bachelor of Science in Anthropology degree from the State University of New York at Rockport, and she has a Master's in Library Science from the University of Kentucky. Before coming to our library system, Bridget worked as an archaeologist and mapping specialist for a Cincinnati environmental consulting firm. In her personal life, she's been married to her husband Mike for 14 years, and they have a beautiful 9-year-old daughter named Rhonda. But unfortunately, Rhonda had an accident this week and broke her wrist. So Bridget and I also share something in common. We both own dogs from the same litter. Bridget will be sharing with you tonight information from the book Lost River Towns of Boone County. It was published in September 2010. Through her efforts as editor of the book and with a skilled team of researchers, they included Adam Hartke, he works at the library here, Jennifer Gregory, she works at our library, and Lori Wilcox, who used to work here. They have unearthed some sunken homesteads along the Ohio River in Boone County and have presented information on these homesteads that no longer exist. And a foreword to the book has been written by one of our members, Don Clare. Now, Bridget has brought some copies of the book here. Some of you have noticed they're on the table. Cost is $20. You can pay for the book when you leave, if you want one. You can pay at our cards and accounts desk downstairs. And because it is a nonprofit organization, the library is, you don't have to pay a tax. But if you don't want to buy a book, we have copies in our system. So if you have a library card with us, you can have our staff at the reference desk check to see if there's one in tonight, or you can reserve a copy so that when one comes in, someone will contact you. And now it's my pleasure to turn the program over to Bridget.
Got a cord here, just kind of get the cord all around. Before we start with Lost River Towns, real quick, I want to remind everyone that on November 26th, as you all may remember, there were a few tragic airplane crashes in the county, and at the airport, one in 1955, and then 65, and then 67. And there has been a memorial group that was created, and that memorial is going to be dedicated at the Idlewild County Park on the 26th. I'm not quite sure what time it was. I think it was about 3 o'clock. If you contact my department, we'll go ahead and get you the time. And also, we're coming up on the 1937, the anniversary of the 1937 flood. So some of you might already know, we are collecting information for that anniversary, and we're going to have a display up here in the art gallery, both in January and February. What we're doing is we're asking that people bring in their stuff, and we're digitizing it, giving you back your originals. But then we have the digital copies available online and then in the art display. And it's okay if it isn't Boone County, because we're also partnering with the Behringer and Crawford Museum to help them with their display going in February as well. And they're going to have 2 rooms and a hallway in the old house. So they're going to have an extensive display. So we're coordinating all throughout the region for information and oral histories and the photographs. So please, my card is on the table by the books, so you can contact our office at any time. So thank you. Okay, Lost River Towns of Boone County. How did we get started with this? Well, one of the things that we realized doing local history is that we're gathering all this information and it wasn't going anywhere. Every once in a while I would do a talk for the Historical Society or for some other group, But really, our research just kind of sat in the library. So we thought to ourselves, what could we do to present this information for everyone? Make it available for whoever is interested. So we came up with the idea of a book. And we started with the Arcadia idea. And then we found History Press. And they actually gave us a little bit more leeway with the design and the style of the book. So that's why we went with History Press. We really enjoyed writing this book. Now, keep in mind, we have 39 miles of riverfront in Boone County. That's a lot of river, okay? And the river has been very significant in Boone County history before we were even Boone County. As early as, the French and Indian War, and before that, you'd have the French trappers coming through, you'd have the English coming through, and with the Native Americans. They were battling over this area for quite a long time, because without the river, you couldn't get to the interior of the country. So we thought it was very important to not only talk about what we still have, but what is gone. I mean, we've all heard of Rabbit Hash, right? And Rabbit Hash is actually the one town we didn't put in the book, because everybody knows where Rabbit Hash is. It's all these other towns and all these other places that people don't know about. And I convinced Don Clare, I said to him, don't worry, Rabbit Hash can have their own book, because there's so much information on Rabbit Hash. So what we did in the book is we started in the northern part upstream, at Constance, and then we went all the way down to Big Bone. And we've covered all the major settlements there. So hopefully, we'll have enough time to get this whole presentation done, because there are a lot of slides. So if you just want me to keep going, just kind of go like this and I'll move on a little bit faster. So we start with Constance, and Constance was actually named after Constance on the Rhine River. And there was German immigrants. And there was Route 20 was the Mitchellville Dry Creek Turnpike, and there's toll houses at each end. And it was called a string town because it was all along the one road, Route 8. Okay? So really it didn't have too many houses, it wasn't in a grid pattern, it just kind of stayed right along the road. Early on in Boone County, we had a lot of ferries, okay? Because that was the quickest way. The river was, of course, our main mode of transport throughout the county and throughout Kentucky, going to St. Louis and beyond. So getting across the river to Ohio and Indiana was very important for residents. And we find that people along the river more closely associated with communities across the river than they did with Burlington, than they did with Walton, and some of these interior towns. How many of you heard of the Anderson Ferry? Everybody's heard of the Anderson. How many of you been on the Anderson Ferry? All right, fantastic. Well, we think actually the Anderson Ferry goes back before 1817. But George Anderson purchased it in 1817 from Raleigh Colston. And you'll excuse me if I look at my notes every once in a while. 39 miles is a long river to kind of get all the dates right. So I want to make sure I get my dates right for you. And what George did was he had a tavern there, and then he had the ferry. And it was really important to have the taverns because, like now, you have the hotels at the interstate. Well, if you think of the river as your interstate, of course, people had to have places to stay along the way. So it was really profitable to have a tavern and a tavern license to go with your ferry and your ferry license. Edmund Anderson ended up actually losing the tavern in 1841, and we think that he actually lost it in a gambling, right? And it's a common story, you know, it's not actually written anywhere, solid evidence, but we're pretty sure that's how we lost it. And then in 1865, it ended up in the Cottonmire family. And that's where it stayed until for well over 100 years. Let's go here. Has some background on that. So here's a view of the Anderson Ferry and the Kentucky shoreline taken from Ohio. Okay, and this can be also found online at nkyviews.com. It's beautiful, but you can see that it really is kind of strung out along, Route 8 without much else going on. It's a beautiful view, though. And this is one of those Constance toll houses. There were two on each end, one on each end of Route 8, and then there was also one up on Point Pleasant Road. But it's kind of interesting, if you wanted to get along Route 8, if you wanted to go into Kenton County, or if you wanted to go further into Boone County, you kind of had to go through Constance. So it was a good way to make money to keep up for taking care of the roads. So the Kottmeyer family and also the Hempfling family are standing in front of, we have original Anderson Ferry house on here, but I believe this is actually the Kottmeyer house, because the original Anderson Ferry house fell into disrepair pretty early on, and by, I believe it was 1970, it was about falling down when they actually tore it down. So I believe somebody previously had told me that this is actually the Kottmeyer house. You can see there are several generations, and actually, I don't have my pointer with me, but the older man sitting kind of in the middle, he's actually holding the youngest generation. So we think that there's at least 4 generations in that photo. So all of these towns were very, fairly well off. They were solid towns. They had a lot of business going on in towns. They had, stores. They had schools. And you can tell from 1876, this is from the Boone County Recorder, the Davis Brothers store. Dry goods, groceries, boots, shoes, hats, caps, hardware, queensware, tinware, flour, salt, and notions. And so they had a business down in Constance, they had one in Hebron, and they also had one in Gainesville, which is around the Idlewild area now. And they marked all their prices down. 11 pounds of sugar for $1. Good Rio coffee, 4 pounds for $1. Good gunpowder tea, 80 cents. Also, a stock of rubber leggings, a good article for these muddy roads of ours, price $1. You would think they'd keep the roads from being too muddy if they were actually paying all those toll fees, right? That somebody actually paid for gravel. So this is a postcard from 1918. 1918 was a very, very bad winter here. And actually, they also had a flood during that time. But there was a lot of ice. And the river froze solid. You've got to remember, this was before the major dams were in. I mean, we had a couple of smaller dams. But, Markland wasn't even dreamed of at this point. And so the river was very low. And so you get a solid cold snap, it was going to freeze on you. And this is what happened to Boone number 5. It kind of froze right in there. Okay, and before we move on from Anderson Ferry, the Kottmeyers named all of their steam ferries after Daniel Boone. So they go from Boone 1 to now we have Boone number 9. And so it's kind of interesting that, the current owners kind of have kept going with that tradition. Now the current owner, is his first name George Anderson? Is he George Anderson? An Anderson gentleman owns the ferry now, but we're not quite sure how he's related to the original George Anderson. We think actually his direct line was a brother to the original George Anderson. So that's how that connection's been made. Okay, so now we have Constance, or I'm sorry, Taylor's Port, and then we also have Parlor Grove. Now, Taylor's Port was actually, a ferry was put in 1827 by Thomas Folks, okay? But it's more well-known for General James Taylor, and that was 1836. And then it became Taylorsville and then Taylor's Port. Again, like every other of these little towns, Taylor's Port was actually in a grid pattern, and you can actually see part of the grid pattern over there. The 1937 flood and then the Markland Dam kind of took out Front Street, and that's what we were finding with a lot of these old towns, that the remnants of the towns were a lot larger. Okay, even Constance, there were more buildings on the other side of Route 8 that you really don't see anymore because of the flooding damage and the raising of the dam. And that's what we found out throughout this whole process, that the river really kind of has taken back a lot of these wonderful old towns. So we have parts of Taylor's Port still standing, but not the whole town. And in some cases, we even lose it to erosion, and we think that's kind of what happened with parts of Taylor's Port also. So here are some school children, circa 1930. It's actually a very large class for 1930 for Boone County, if you think about it. For what we think of as little Taylor's Port, okay? Can you imagine that many children being in Taylor's Port now? No, you can't. I mean, so, and they're all very happy, and you'll notice how well they're dressed. You know, some towns, of these old photos we have in Boone County, you can really tell the economy of a certain town, okay, or a certain school district by how well the children are dressed. And so Taylor's Port was pretty well off. Steamboating and river recreation has always been very important along the river. And so this is, again, from Melissa Humphrey. She now lives, I believe, in Florida, but we were grateful that she was able to contribute some of her photos from her family. And this shows John Grimm. He's standing in the boat looking dapper, about 1914. And they look like they're teenagers having a good time. And that was also on our cover. I believe that's on our cover, yeah. This is River Road, Route 8. And again, early 20th century, probably before 1920. Some gravel. Some places it's not much wider now than it was then. Pericles Boy Grubbs, he was the son of Doc Grubbs down there. And apparently, he was a slow boy, and so after his parents died, the neighborhood kind of had taken him in and were helping to take care of him. So, but you can see the buggy, you know, still in early 20th century. Even though we do have some cars about, it's mostly buggy travel. Steamboats. Parlor Grove. Let's talk a minute about Parlor Grove. Have you ever heard of Parlor Grove besides the subdivision? Okay. Parlor Grove was just downriver from Taylor's Port. And it was the Coney Island of the 1860s, 70s, and 80s. In fact, Coney Island in the early 1890s actually took away business from Parlor Grove. But what people would do is they would come from Cincinnati to the picnic grounds at Parlor Grove, and they would spend the day. So there were early amusement park rides, there were festivals, there were concerts and music events. And actually, you go down there now and it's just big open field. You can't even really tell. But they had large steamboats like the Thomas Sherlock docking there, okay, to come to this. I mean, they would have full loads of people coming in on the weekends. And Taylorsport kind of reaped the benefits of having all those people coming through town to get to Parlor Grove. So business was very, very good for Taylorsport until the picnic grounds kind of closed. And it was 1901 when the land was sold to Charles O. Hempling. And you know all the Hemplings own all that property down there. Well, this was part of that. And then it was all converted to farmland. Now, there was a rumor, and I didn't put it in the book because we don't know for certain, but there's a Hempling family belief that actually, during one of the epidemics in Cincinnati, they brought remains from the epidemic and buried them on Parlor Grove property, okay? And of course, we do have several epidemics, you know, the late 1800s, early 1900s, up to the time of the flu. So, but we can't really figure out when that was, you know. Probably would be a good thing to do